The Sizzle season features a ton of new changes to Salmon Run, but in this video I'm going to focus on the crazy new buffs that a lot of main weapons receive. I'll also be explaining how these buffs actually make a difference for these weapons. The Dynamo Roller got a pretty significant buff to its ink efficiency. Before the patch, it could only do 5 horizontal or vertical flicks before running out of ink. But now it can comfortably do 6 flicks while still having a little bit of ink to spare. More importantly, the Dynamo can now roll for longer periods of time and therefore farther distances. Here's a comparison between the two versions. The Octobrush is now slightly more ink efficient when swinging, which isn't a huge buff but is a welcome change considering how fast it used to run out of ink before. The Big Swig got a damage buff to its roll mode, which is going to make it feel a lot better to use. Before the patch, rolling with the Big Swig only dealt 70 damage. This was obviously pretty bad since it wasn't even able to one-shot regular chum, which meant that you would take knockback if you rolled into them. Thankfully, they buffed the damage all the way up to 100, which means you can now roll over chum and keep your momentum. This also makes rolling with the Big Swig a much more viable option of dealing damage to tank your targets. The Snipewriter is another big winner of the patch. Pre-patch Pencil when fully charged did 180 damage with one of its 5 shots for a grand total of 900 damage per charge. This was already a lot of damage and enough to kill most bosses with a single charge, but not enough to kill the tankiest bosses like the Big Shot. Now, this thing does 240 damage per shot for a whopping 1200 total damage per charge. Now it can 2-shot Cohawks instead of 3-shotting them. It can 4-shot a Drizzler and still have a shot to repel the torpedo. And it can kill the 1200 HP bosses with just a single charge. So that includes big shots, Maws, and flipper floppers that still have armor. It also received an ink efficiency buff to its tap shots, which will be helpful in difficult situations. The Slosher got a damage buff that I think makes a lot of sense. It used to do 100 damage per slosh, which meant that it took a whole 4 shots just to kill something like a Cohawk. After the buff, the Slosher deals 140 damage per slosh, meaning it can now 3-shot Cohawks and 4-shot the 500 HP bosses instead of 5-shotting them. Next up is the Tenta Brella. Pre-patch Tent could do a maximum of 245 damage with a single shot, which I always thought was strange because it was just 5 damage shy of being able to 2-shot the 500 HP bosses like Scrappers, Slammin' Lids, and Steel Eels. A single pellet from the shot dealt only 35 damage and the Brella dealt only 100. Post-patch Tent can do up to 360 damage with a single shot, which is a massive upgrade. Now it's strong enough to one-shot steelhead bombs and 2-shot the 500 HP bosses I mentioned before. The individual pellets now deal 45 damage, which is enough to take out a small fry, and the Brella itself deals 150. The Undercover Brella also received a damage buff. It used to deal 120 damage per shot, and contact with the Brella used to only deal 40. Now it does 150 damage per shot. This buff is really felt versus bosses such as Steelheads, which you can now 2-shot instead of 3. Contact damage with the Brella was also buffed to 50, which may not seem like a lot, but actually makes a huge difference in certain scenarios such as glowflies where the chum only have 50 HP. The Tri-Stringer received a small buff to the damage of its partial charges. A half charge used to deal 225 total damage, with each of the 3 projectiles doing 75. After the patch, a half charge deals 300 damage, with each of the individual projectiles doing 100. The damage of tap shots and fully charged shots did not change, so this might promote the use of more partial charges with the Tri-Stringer. Finally, we have the Reef-lux. It got a buff to its tap shots, which used to deal 96 total damage with each projectile doing 32, and now deals 102 total damage with each projectile doing 34. This is actually a much more significant buff than it seems, because the Reef-lux tap shots already had good damage per second before, and plus, now you can one-shot chum with them if you land all 3 projectiles. The Reef-lux half charges also got buffed from doing 150 damage before, to now doing 210 damage. This is interesting because the full charges used to do 210 damage but haven't been changed, so now there's no reason to do full charges instead of half charges unless you need the extra range or tighter spread on the projectiles. That's been all the changes to main weapons, but there are a ton of other changes coming to Salmon Run, and if you want to check those out, I've left a link to the patch notes in the description. I think this patch is really going to help out a lot of the weapons that used to be on the weaker side in Salmon Run. I hope to be streaming a lot of Salmon Run in this new season, so be sure to follow my Twitch account, which I've also left a link to in the description and comments. This took a lot of work, so if you've enjoyed the video or found it informative, please consider subscribing, and I hope to see you in the next video.